right into it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Mike Totoris, City of Milwaukee Health Department Commissioner. Last name is Totoraitis. We're here today to continue to release the information as we get it for the schools that we're investigating. One update that we did want to provide at the onset, we are continuing to work with our healthcare providers across the region to plan for several clinics for lead screening for the kids affected at the schools that we're looking at. We had a meeting with healthcare leaders from across the region yesterday, hoping to announce a schedule for those clinics very soon. In the interim, if you are a concerned parent, you can reach out to your provider or your pediatrician to make a plan to get a screening today. That continues to be an option that we announced last week, but just want to stress that there's options now. And then we recognize that it's tricky as a parent, juggling, working kiddos to make those plans. So that's why we're working with our providers and the community partners like Children's Wisconsin 16th Street Community Health Centers and partners at Cole to make sure that we are making testing accessible. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Deputy Commissioner Tyler Weber, who's going to walk through the report as we did with Goldus.
Hi everyone, Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Health Tyler Weber for the City of Milwaukee Health Department. I'm going to do a very high-level walkthrough of the report. It's been up now since yesterday, so we'll try and just move right into questions. Seems good. Right, I'm not going to use that. So this is always one of the more important pages. This summarizes the dust wipes from across the school. I'm not going to go over the XRF readings because, again, that's more to identify where the lead paint is. The dust really indicates then that where the hazards specifically are. The XRF kind of identifies the lead that creates the dust. So the ground level has the most concernings. So all windowsills on the ground floor are considered dust lead hazard, and all floors on the ground floor are considered a dust lead hazard, and there are classrooms there. We found lower levels of lead on the first and second floors, but nonetheless we had readings that came back above the levels that we're looking for to get under 100 micrograms per square foot. Therefore, that's we added the notes that these surfaces and all other like structures should be considered elevated, and so we're requiring corrective measures on those floors as well. So again, lead is very deleterious and is really harmful for children. So again, we take these precautions of trying to emphasize the need to move quickly on this work and why we highlight everything in red and are still putting forward the recommendations, even though the averages are lower than GOLDA on some of these floors, that all the work still needs to be done. Then, before we jump down into pictures, we had water samples that were also elevated as they were in GOLDA. Not going to go into detail on those, but we will be enhancing our recommendations for MPS on what they may need to do. We did find a lot of these are in maybe bathroom sinks or hand washing sinks, but as we can't guarantee child behavior, we're going to have to revisit and enhance our recommendations beyond what we've been provided so far. And then our orders have been written and shared with MPS as of yesterday, and the immediate corrective action of interim controls are very important for them to get into Kagel and to clean and to begin patching surfaces until they can do more extensive remediation and abatement work. And with that, I think I'll leave it open to, let's start the questions.
Could you go into a little bit more about the water results, just
Yes.
specifically what for me it's a little harder to understand than this big
Sure,
report.
yeah.
Like where exactly it was found and what those specific recommendations would be for the school district to
So, one, the school district does have filtered water drinking stations. So we do test those stations as well. And I believe those samples are coming in within a safe threshold. It's the other sinks. I think Golda had one in the, even in the kitchen. There's hand washing sinks where the lead levels are coming back high. If you'll notice on ours, we put this in as a placeholder. There's an EPA level where it should be, EPA says it should be below 15 parts per billion. That's even lowering to 10 in 2027, but it's not necessarily a health recommendation. Ideally, we're in a world where all water, all dust wipe samples, everything comes back as 0. We have so much lead in the environment that we have to get closer to 0. And so, you know, there are some concerns about what is coming in with the water samples. And so, yes, we've recommended that they need to strengthen their water plan, lead and water plan, safety plan, and then also improve signage, but we have to look at other recommendations beyond that, which we will be providing. We haven't fully executed that yet, but in other circumstances outside of MPS, we've had the recommendation of replacing faucets and sinks, potentially internal plumbing, but that may need to have some help with MPS 2 of just what are child behavior, what are these different sinks and faucets and pipes. Like, there's a lot that goes into some of that decision making, but we're going to have to enhance our water recommendations.
And would that be for both Golda and Kagel?
Both Golda, Kagel, and potentially overall MPS recommendation.
Can you give us an update on the 5-day hazard control at Golda Meyer? I believe today was the deadline.
So we're going back in tomorrow for Golda to collect dust wipe samples. So normally on a project, because they're also smaller in scope, we can go in on the front end to collect the dust wipes to get a picture of where the lead hazards are, do internal controls, then do the full abatement, and then do a clearance in the back end. But given the scale and scope of what is happening here, we are adding more dust wipe samples along the cleanup and remediation process. So we are collecting those tomorrow, running the samples as quickly as we can. It may take a day or two, and then we'll see where their efforts have taken them at this point. But we're still going to have to do more samples even after that for a final clearance.
Just to make sure that they properly cleaned everything to the best of their ability.
Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you know at Kagel how or where the child was lead poisoned?
We do know, because we know the child, we know the room, but that may help identify the child, but we have that information.
I guess, can you give us a sense? Because, like, I think it was a bathroom at Golda Meyer, like,
Yes.
it's a classroom or it's a bathroom or it's a...
This is a classroom.
a classroom. Okay.
Do you want to show the photos?
Yes. Sorry, gotta go all the way down. So, less photos than Golda, but nonetheless, we have found, obviously, deteriorated paint, as I'm sure you've all looked through. So our orders include needing to correct these chip paints in the ceiling, around doors, friction surfaces. So we often do give special attention to the doors and windows in all locations that we inspect. Also where chairs might brush up against the wall, etc. But so this is pictures from the girls' bathroom, peeling paint on the wall. So obviously concerns.
It may be obvious, but can you describe how these results compare to the Golda Meyer results?
So we found dust wipe samples that were over the threshold, at both schools. Obviously Golda were much higher than Kagel, but the concerns at Kagel are still readily apparent. So the urgency is no less than Golda.
So compared to Golda, obviously 1,600 micrograms per square foot at Golda. How does that compare with Kagel? Is that less than 1,600, or is it within?
Yeah, it's less. That's one of the pages I showed initially, where we have some of the means were below the threshold, but nonetheless we still had dust wipe samples that were well above. And so we have to take the whole picture in consideration, not just the mean. We don't say, oh, the mean was down, so you're good to go, but we had dust wipes that came back and well above that threshold. So it is, we still have concerns, and that's why we're able to write our orders.
Have you been able to get, well, I know you're going into Golda tomorrow, but have you heard heard from the district at all of what measures they've taken? I think I saw some painters going in the other night. Have you guys heard from any?
Heard painters, and they've contracted a cleaning company as well to go in there. So we hope to see improved results. Question?
Could you elaborate a little more on the difference between interim controls and abatement?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes they overlap if you have a Venn diagram. One of the most significant parts of interim controls is rapid cleaning. Get in there, wet mop, wipe it down, make sure you're not just using the mop from room to room. You got to be able to throw it out, to throw out the lead that is collected with it. So that is really critical, and it can be very effective if you're doing routine cleaning to keep the lead dust in check. And then also, if there's very apparent hazards, peeling paint off the wall, interim control could be honestly just taping it over, which we've even done in homes, just to immediately get in there before we have the full scale and scope of the work of any project. Then the abatement is often significant taping. You know, when we're working on a family's home, we have to move all their materials to the center of the room and cover it in plastic, and then you have to clean it. You cover everything in plastic. You start doing the work to remove the lead or encase it, and then you have to clean every day while you're doing the work, because you're creating more lead dust as you're chipping and peeling paint away, as you're still covering up, as you're replacing windows, etc. So there's significant cleaning through the whole abatement process, but you're either encasing the lead and or completely removing it in abatement.
Are both steps of work being done at these schools, both interim controls and abatement?
Yes, our orders have that called out, where interim controls have to be done within X period of time, and that's why we're going back to see how effective those controls were with our dust wipes, and then prioritizing those wipes within our lab. And then they have more time to do the full abatement work, because it just does take more time to do that.
You had mentioned the potential of closing, or talking with the city attorney about closing Golda Meir last time. Is that potential here for Kagel?
It's still a potential, yes.
Have you made any leeway on that?
Not yet. We're trying to use the data from the dust wipes to determine that, and finalizing conversations with the city attorney.
From tomorrow, whatever you find out tomorrow.
Yeah.
I know you guys have made it pretty clear that these buildings are safe if the district follows the guidelines you've set forth. There is kind of there's days between that, right? You're not going back in until tomorrow to find out if they're doing that. What are you telling parents about this in between? Are these schools still safe to occupy right now without knowing if the district is following?
Right,
these
and
guidelines?
so we found with our initial risk assessment that there are unsafe levels of lead from the start. And so this is why this is really challenging for parents, it's really challenging for faculty and staff, teachers, and so tried to share some information of what can be done immediately as well, from hand washing to wiping desks down, whatever can be done in an interim to lessen any potential impact on the children and adults that are exposed in that space. But you know, the reports identified hazards, and hazards are not safe. So, yeah.
A little bit more too. Because I think, again, this is a consistent question that, regardless of the interim controls or the remediation that's going to happen, that I think a lot of parents want answered. And if you think about the timeline of when the data was collected, that was happening right as we were coming into the school. So that's when we started working with MPS Facility Services to make sure that they were doing the interim controls and starting to clean the process. So as we're doing our investigation, we want to give the folks that we're working with the chance to do, the right thing and do the cleaning. So that's, again, back in mid-January when we began working with MPS, giving them the opportunity to start doing the cleaning. As we collected our data, seeing that there are concerning levels of lead, as Deputy Commissioner Weber pointed out, issue the order then to say, hey, this is an issue, we need you to let's be crystal clear on what needs to happen. So as we mentioned, normally in a project, we don't go in at such an early point to do additional testing to make sure that progress is being made. But given the nature of the schools and the number of children that are in each of the schools, we want to go in and make sure that progress is being made. We cannot act on our authority without good data to back up what's going on. And we also want to give the district an opportunity to continue to do the right thing and starting to kind of turn the ship on the cleaning and the maintenance of the buildings.
We've been told that any school built before '78, has a risk. I've spoken to multiple parents who say that this level of attention of testing needs to be more district-wide. Realistically, what is the capability here at the health department to do that?
Yeah, Tyler can talk a little bit about what the department can do. I can say we are working with our state partners right now to look at what other state resources could come to Milwaukee to help the district assess their buildings. Again, when we started this process, we're focusing on a lead-poisoned child, and our process follows those lead-poisoned children. Getting out ahead of lead-poisoning children is going to require the district to be proactive with the cleaning and the remediation of the lead hazards in their district buildings. And I think there's a role for a lot of our state partners to be continuing to support this effort and helping the district get ahead of this. I think, Tyler, you're going to add a little bit more.
This is significant amount of work on MHD's side, and it's critically important that we try and get in front of this as much as we can. And I think I went over this last time, but it's still really important to reiterate. For the Golda Meyer lead risk assessment on a Saturday, it took 8 lead risk assessors 6 hours. That normally takes us a project to go into a single family home or a unit in a duplex, 2 lead risk assessors 2 to 3 hours. So we're using overtime pay. We're including for our lab staff when a single unit only requires 30 to 40 dust wipe samples. We took 130 to 140 just one time for the full lead risk assessment at Golda, and that's a week's capacity of dust wipe work for our lab. And we have recently, in the last year or two, purchased new equipment to enhance our ability to run more dust wipe samples, anticipating with federal funding that we're going to increase our abatement work. So even with newer equipment and better processes, we're still strained on this. And so we are very challenged to get in, and 180 buildings, if they're all equivalent to Golda, there's not enough weeks in the year for us to run all those dust wipe samples. So that alone is a challenging. That doesn't include the water samples, that doesn't include the report writing, and then our standard caseload on an annual basis. And so it is really critical that MPS revisits their lead safety plan and start planning rapidly what they can do to look at their other schools. Because they also have not only 180 pre-1978, but they have buildings pre-1900. And so the older the building, the more urgent it is to get inside.
Do you have the numbers for Kagel, like how many lead risk assessors were in there and for how long?
I think it was about the same. I think 130 dust wipe samples were taken. We did work on a Saturday. It was a 6 to 8 range lead risk assessors, about the same time frame. We imagine it's going to be about the same for Maryland on Saturday.
Yeah, can you tell me where that stands right now? That's this Saturday
Yes.
you're doing that?
Yes.
Also Trowbridge on Saturday, is that correct?
No, not yet. We're planning, trying to figure it out. We're prioritizing the schools as they come to us, so we need to continue planning to get into Trowbridge.
The commissioner mentioned clinics for the impacted schools. One, could you go over what those clinics might look like for families? And then 2, again, to my last question, could this be more of a district-wide thing rather than just the 2 or 3 schools that are currently looking at?
Yeah, so, do the simple math of it. We have 180 schools roughly that are built before 1978, and MPS has a lot of students in the tens of thousands. So obviously we're strongly encouraging parents of 6 and unders and parents of children with developmental needs to get screened now. So make that plan. Talk to your pediatrician to do that right now. But then for children between the age of 6 and up into the adults, teachers who are in the district as well, if they're interested in getting a lead screen, they can do that now. Realizing that that's easier said than done, and this is a huge volume of people we're talking about across the entire city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, and so there's 2 parts to it. There's the initial screen, and then there's the follow-up that happens with that. And for each case, we see around 1,200 of these cases every year, and we have follow-up for all of those 1,200. For 100 to 200 annually, we do really intensive investigations, and that's what led us obviously into this situation. But when we start to do community-based screening for district students, we anticipate to find additional students. So in the last week, we've been working not only internally, but with our state partners and with our healthcare providers to think through what a process is going to look like. So in practice, once we have sites identified, what a parent will expect or a guardian will expect is they will come to a event. We are going to be working with the district to distribute consents ahead of time, so you can pre-fill those out and essentially hand that to our staff, some of our partner staff that will shepherd you through different stations, and then you'd get your screening for a capillary screening, which is essentially a finger prick, and then if you're testing at a higher level, you'll do an immediate venous draw where you do a blood draw to do confirmatory testing, and that will all happen in one space. You won't say, hey, come back 2 days later. Children's Wisconsin has a really good track record of doing this community testing with us, so we're extremely grateful for their leadership in this space. They were one of the first phone calls we made after this started happening, and they immediately answered the call, as well as 16th Street. So once we have the sites identified, we will get the consents out to the parents at the schools that we're already in, and then we will continue to have the broader conversation of how we'll do additional testing sites for the broader community of MPS students.
Kind of like we saw like during the pandemic.
Yep.
Kind of similar to that.
Yeah.
Commissioner, are you satisfied with the response you've gotten from MPS in regards to lead in these schools?
Yeah, we've, as with any major issue, you really need strong communication and leadership from the district, and we've been really pleased with the communication that's been coming with us. Obviously, there's a lot of work that the district needs to do, and certainly the photos demonstrate the level of need at each of these schools. They are facing a really significant challenge, and we are optimistic, as everyone else is, that we want to see MPS to be successful in this, and very excited that they identified a new superintendent, and excited to work with them on this issue, because this isn't going to resolve overnight. And as we mentioned, the conversation continues beyond just these schools to think about proactively looking at the additional schools, potentially with state resources, to see what can be done to get ahead of it. Do you have a...
From your question earlier. A few things I want to add, building off of that. Lead risk assessments are intensive work. MPS has a lot of schools, but again, you don't need a lead risk assessor. You don't need a lead risk assessment for every school to urgently move forward. That would be the ideal scenario, but that's also, we have to be realistic. MPS does have a lead safety plan, and they could improve their surveillance of the work. That's not necessarily outlined, so that's one of the recommendations we're working on. So improve the surveillance of the building. I think last time we shared that they do have 2 lead risk assessors on staff, but they have a large number of lead renovators. So how do you do renovation work in a lead safe way? And they have those certifications on staff. And so there's an opportunity there to go through the schools. You don't need a lead risk assessor to say, hey, that paint is chipping, but you can see that work, you can clean it up, you can get it done without having to do a full lead risk assessment. And so some hybrid approach may be needed to get ahead of all these other schools before we have a situation like we have in Golda and Kagel and others.
You mentioned that they obviously need to do work on this plan that they have, even back to last week when we first learned about this. What is the state of that, and who gives those recommendations to MPS?
We can give recommendations. We can't enforce that there's follow-through. Except with our orders, and except when we identify a lead-poisoned child or we identified lead in some capacity, then we can. But we can't have just, well, that school's from 1900. We need more than that. On our end, for our legal authority.
And then, obviously, you talked about the communication. Do you guys know where their revisions stand on this plan yet?
No, not at this time.
When it comes to the existing lead-based paint compliance programs that they have, they've mentioned they allegedly do these yearly inspections for the paint quality and the paint chipping. Is what you're seeing in these schools consistent with a building that's been inspected for flaky
No.
paint? No.
Do you have a sense for, obviously the levels are still concerning in both of these schools, but why they're a little bit lower at Kagel versus,
We don't have, I can't give a direct answer on that. We don't have information. I don't know if there's different cleaning practices between the school, if one school had maybe work or painting work done more recently than the other. There could be a number of factors.
Have you heard back from MPS about Kagel yet, whether or not there have been any immediate actions that have been taken to stabilize the paint?
Not yet.
Not yet? Or you haven't heard back yet, or they haven't done it yet?
I haven't heard.
Will there be a 5-day hazard clean as well for Kagel?
It's in the order, so that should begin immediately.
Immediately as in today.
Well, the order to do interim controls is a short timeline for a reason. So of a building that size, you want to get moving as soon as you can.
Going back a little bit to some of the water data, I've noticed that a lot of the water samples for Kagel Elementary, there are many more than that are above the preventative action limit that DHS sets of 1.5
Yeah. Yep.
milligrams. And some of these, you mentioned there's like the kitchen faucets. Do you happen to know whether or not those kitchen faucets, for example, are those like used for cooking? Is that water that's used for cooking?
We have the same question. We haven't learned yet, and that's part of enhancing our recommendations for MPS.
is it your sense that this is internal plumbing that's the problem? Like, do they still have lead service lines to these schools?
From Milwaukee Water Works, we've heard that there are no lead service lines, so this would be internal plumbing.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference between, like, say, the preventative action limit and the enforcement standard between, like, 1.5 nanograms and 15 nanograms of lead? Like, are those both harmful amounts of lead to have in water, or what's the difference in severity there?
That's an important nuance, and the closer we can get to zero, the better. Something more broadly on the science of lead, as more research comes out, you see over the years the lead action levels in water and dust wipes keep lowering. So HUD just lowered what the dust wipe samples should be from 15 parts per billion down to 10, even this past year. The lead and copper rule lowered the amount of water that's safe to have in a water utility, or I shouldn't say safe, but what the level should be in the water utility. And then also the CDC lowered its recommended action from 5 micrograms per deciliter in a blood reading down to 3.5. In the future, that could lower even more. And so we have to collectively work to try and get to zero, knowing that there's a lot of lead out there. So just the urgency keeps increasing to take more action on this. So that's a really broad, high-level answer, but we need to take all the actions we can to reduce the lead exposure at every possible moment.
We've got time for one more.
Thank you.
Commissioner, did you want anything else to wrap it up?
Yeah. We really appreciate the continued focus on this really critical issue. As many of us are parents, we care deeply about the safety of our children, and like a lot of the folks at the district, we are also residents and neighbors and parents of MPS students, and we are committed to continuing to work with MPS on this really critical issue facing our city. As Deputy Commissioner mentioned, the federal government recognizes how important lead hazards are in our communities and is doing everything to continue to hold us to a high standard of keeping our children safe, and we adhere to that standard. We're extremely proud of our lead team in our lab for having the capacity right now to respond to this emergency, and we will continue to do so throughout the duration.
Do you have any concerns about the budget, like MHD's budget and capacity to continue responding?
We are tracking closely the costs associated with this. I think I'll probably have a report out on that soon, and we can certainly share that. We are fortunate to be at the beginning of a fiscal year, so we have a little bit more flexibility, but that is something that we are monitoring closely. So, thank you.